Uh, we went to see the Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, on the issue of the Millennium Development Goals, because this year, 2010, marks 10 years after India made a commitment, along with all the other countries in the world, to do certain things to improve the lives of poor people. And India, for the first time, has actually produced a monitoring report on the MDGs that is going to be presented at the upcoming meeting in September at the UN General Assembly. And we had expected that the Prime Minister would be leading that delegation. So we went to talk to him about some of the issues. So there were two kinds of issues. One was on process, to say that actually that report that was written there should have been wider consultation with civil society on the interpretation of some of the data that was being presented in the report. Secondly, that in many countries, civil society members go as part of the official delegation to the UN, and we requested him to take some members of civil society along. So that was on process. On substance, we had a list of issues that we presented to him, saying what kinds of policies we think should be enacted in India that would lead to a truly inclusive development path. One of them, of course, is where poor people get their livelihoods from. So it was about access and control over natural resources. It was about agriculture and replicating the success of the Green Revolution in Eastern India. And then very specifically on each of the MDGs. On education, of course, we have a wonderful right to education law, how to enact it so that it truly becomes a reality on the ground. On healthcare, we don't have such a right to health law. So we are lobbying for that. It would be very good to enshrine basic healthcare as a right. And then on women's empowerment, which we believe is the underlying cross-cutting issue for attaining MDGs in India and elsewhere, to get the passage of the Women's Reservation Bill as a sign of commitment right at the top on women empowerment. So many issues of this kind that we presented to him. Well, it depends on what you mean by public-private partnership. We believe that every sector has a very important role to play in getting India onto the truly inclusive growth path that will lead to an attainment of the MDGs. So we are not seeing inclusive growth yet. I think today we are talking about mining and Vedanta. Corporates like that play a very, very important role. If they were all doing, working in a manner that was environmentally friendly and socially responsible, that would make a huge impact on India. So we believe they have a very important role to play by doing the right kinds of projects that really benefit poor people. On certain other things, we believe really that certain things are fundamental rights of poor people, like health, basic healthcare, basic education, and there we would see less of a role for the private sector, and we really believe it's the government's responsibility to deliver on those basic rights. I think for all of us here, what we believe is that we have been very successful now in lobbying and getting pro-poor legislation. So we have a very good policy framework in India. We have good laws like National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, like right to information, like the right to education, like the domestic violence law. But when you look at implementation on the ground, and in particular implementation from the perspective of the most marginalized communities in India, you see that there's a big gap between what is on paper and what is actually being delivered to poor people. So that is kind of the bridge, if you like, that we try and fill, which is to raise awareness amongst poor people about their rights. So it's really about information, it's about organization, and then it's really about demanding those rights. But to do it community by community, I think it takes a huge effort. And if the government could be playing a more proactive role on spreading information, as they're doing now on the right to education, for example, you see this huge campaign trying to inform people that this law is there. If they were that serious about the implementation of all the other laws, that would be a good thing, just spreading awareness. Second thing, lobbying for budgets to back actual implementation of these laws. So we have been asking for a long time for increased healthcare expenditures to go up from 1% of GDP to 3%, and we have not really seen any progress at all. On education, we are asking for an increase from 3% of GDP to 6%. So we believe that these social sectors that are so critical for poor people remain severely underfunded in India, and we're really not seeing much of a will to actually implement these programs so that they deliver high quality programs on the ground. Same thing with the domestic violence law. There's hardly any budget behind it, so it remains a really good law. So I think the biggest challenge is implementation, how to really get things moving on the ground. I think that in achieving the Millennium Development Goals and in achieving a pro-poor development path in India, we have a basic role to play, which is firstly to get governments to make the kind of promises that they're making, like the MDGs or like different policies and programs that are promised in various plans, but then to constantly remind them about the implementation and constantly remind them about the promises that are usually made and then not ever implemented. So I think that is the role of civil society, holding government accountable to delivering on their promises, and secondly then really working with the disempowered and the marginalized communities to make them aware of their rights, and for them also in turn to demand accountability from government. Well, we are part of a large number of networks and we fund about 170 NGOs. We take part very actively, our partners take part in these stand-up campaigns. Last year many of our partners organized all kinds of events to raise awareness about the MDGs. We participate in meetings like the one we had with the Prime Minister, with other policy makers. We have a website on which we talk about these issues. We write about them in our newsletters. So we really make a huge effort to keep it on the front burner. We use brand ambassadors. We do everything we can really to be keeping this issue alive all the time.